Sarah stood frozen at the head of the long mahogany table, her hands trembling as her husband's words echoed through the silent dining room. "You're just a poor fat pig. You should be grateful anyone married you." 20 pairs of eyes watched. No one spoke. No one defended her. What they didn't know was that the woman David just humiliated had signed papers that morning. Papers that made her the owner of his father's collapsing tech company. The same company David thought was being bought by some faceless corporation. Behind her simple dress and soft curves was Sarah Mitchell, secret heir to a billion-dollar empire. And the man who just broke her heart was standing on ground she now owned. This isn't just about an insult. It's about what happens when you underestimate the quiet ones. Dear viewers, if you're watching without subscribing, you're missing stories that matter. Hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Let's begin. Sarah Mitchell stood in her modest living room in downtown Seattle, gripping a cream-colored scarf between her trembling fingers. The fabric was old, fraying at the edges, but she held it like a lifeline. Her breath came in sharp bursts, then slowly steadied. This scarf had belonged to her mother, Linda Mitchell, a woman who had quietly controlled one of the largest investment portfolios on the West Coast. Linda was known in business circles as the silent strategist, a woman who shaped markets without ever seeking the spotlight. Sarah folded the scarf with deliberate care, her movements practiced and precise. The apartment around her reflected her carefully constructed life, a small sofa, second-hand furniture, warm but simple lighting. Nothing suggested wealth. Nothing hinted at power. David called this place temporary. He said they'd move once his father's software company recovered. Sarah never argued. She'd learned long ago that some truths were safer kept hidden. But the shelf across the room told a different story. A framed photograph showed young Sarah, maybe 9 years old, standing beside her mother in a glass-walled boardroom. Behind them, executives in expensive suits looked on as Linda signed documents that would shift millions. Sarah remembered that day clearly. One executive had leaned down and said, "Your daughter watches everything." Linda had smiled. "She's learning what real power looks like." In the car afterward, her mother's words had changed Sarah's life forever. "Power isn't about showing off, sweetheart. It's about protecting what matters." Those words became Sarah's foundation. When Linda died suddenly, Sarah inherited everything at 19. Not a portion. All of it. Billions in assets, shares in dozens of companies, a legacy built in silence and passed down even quieter. Legally, she never changed her name on those documents. Every contract, every trust, every acquisition bore the name Sarah Mitchell. Davis was just the surname she used for marriage, for neighbors, for family dinners where no one suspected the quiet, plus-sized wife knew more about corporate finance than anyone at the table. Sarah had sworn never to let wealth define her relationships. She'd watched people try to use her mother. She'd seen Linda cry behind closed office doors when friendships turned out to be strategic plays. So Sarah built a different life. Simple job as a freelance graphic designer. Simple home. Simple appearance. She became the woman no one envied, no one targeted, no one suspected. The disguise had protected her for years. Until now. Water stopped running in the bathroom down the hall. A door clicked open. David stepped into the hallway, towel around his neck, phone in hand. "I can't stand this," he muttered loud enough for Sarah to hear. "Always so slow, always so clueless." Sarah closed her eyes briefly. The disrespect had been growing for months, sharpened by the stress of his father's failing company. He wasn't always like this. But pressure had revealed who he really was. She straightened the room, adjusted a plant near the window, wiped an invisible speck from the coffee table. Small gestures that gave her a sense of control when everything else felt uncertain. When she picked up her purse to leave, a strange tightness crept up her spine. That familiar sensation, her mother called it the Mitchell intuition. The feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Sarah stepped outside, not knowing that today would be the day everything changed. Behind her, David's phone buzzed. A woman's voice played through a message. "See you tonight, David." He smiled, the smile Sarah hadn't seen in months. The smile he now saved for someone else. 3 nights before the dinner that would change everything, Sarah sat at her small desk, laptop glowing in the dim light. Her nightly routine, reviewing the list of potential acquisitions her legal team screened for her investment portfolio. A video call window opened. Margaret Wells appeared on screen, Sarah's family attorney, a sharp woman in her late 50s with silver hair and glasses that seemed to see through every lie. "Sarah, we need to discuss the next round of acquisitions," Margaret said, her tone professional but warm. "I'm sending over several files now." Sarah's screen filled with documents, each labeled with code numbers instead of company names. Asset 67A. Asset 67B. Asset 68C. This was Linda Mitchell's system, a security measure that kept Sarah's identity hidden from every company she owned or invested in. Numbers meant distance. Numbers meant protection. Numbers meant no one could manipulate her with sentiment or family connections. "This next one is interesting," Margaret continued, tapping her screen. Asset 67B. It's a struggling software development company based here in Seattle. The financials show poor recent management, but the underlying structure is solid. Good client contracts, talented developers, just needs proper leadership. Sarah leaned forward, studying the charts and ratios. No company name appeared on her summary, only performance data, risk assessments, and projected returns. "What sector?" Sarah asked. "Tech cloud-based solutions, custom software development. Family-run business. 3 generations. Very sentimental about legacy, which is why they're reluctant to make necessary changes." Sarah nodded slowly. She'd seen this pattern before. Family businesses that valued tradition over adaptation. Her mother had turned around dozens of similar companies. "Our recommendation is to acquire before it collapses completely," Margaret said. "The price is favorable, and anonymity will remain intact as always. Our checks show no conflicts with your existing holdings." On Sarah's screen, the data looked clean. Solid foundation, salvageable situation, reasonable investment. The full legal name, Davis Tech Solutions, appeared only on Margaret's internal documents, never on Sarah's summary. Sarah had no reason to connect the dots. Davis was a common surname. Seattle had hundreds of tech companies. Nothing in the coded presentation suggested this company had anything to do with her husband's family. "Approve the acquisition," Sarah said calmly, signing the digital document with her usual certainty. "Excellent. I'll process everything through the holding company. As always, they'll see only the corporate entity, never your personal name." As Sarah closed her laptop, the screen flickered briefly. For just a split second, the full company name flashed across the display before shutting down. Davis Tech Solutions. Sarah didn't see it. But the audience does. The next morning, Sarah woke to find David already gone. A note on the kitchen counter, "Meeting with Dad about the company. Don't wait up." She folded the note slowly, that strange tightness returning to her chest. David had been distant for months, always stressed, always irritable. She told herself it was the pressure of watching his father's business struggle. What she didn't know was that David sat in a coffee shop across town, not with his father, but with someone else entirely. Lisa Warren, 28, worked as a marketing coordinator at Davis Tech Solutions. Confident, polished, she knew exactly how to make a man feel understood. "You're too stressed," Lisa said, her hand resting on David's arm. "You know I'm here for you." David smiled, that genuine smile Sarah rarely saw anymore. "You always know what to say." Through the window, Sarah walked past carrying a small container of David's favorite cookies she'd baked that morning. She'd wanted to surprise him, support him, remind him they were partners. She glanced through the cafe window and froze. 2 silhouettes sat close together. She recognized David's posture immediately. The other figure, clearly a woman, leaned in far too close for a business meeting. Sarah couldn't see details through the tinted glass, but she saw enough. The body language. The intimacy. The way David laughed, relaxed and open in a way he hadn't been with her in months. Her grip tightened on the container. Her breath caught. She stepped back, careful not to be seen, and watched from behind a parked car. Inside, Lisa whispered something in David's ear. He chuckled, clearly comfortable with her proximity. Sarah's chest tightened painfully. She wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. Stress made people seek support from colleagues, right? But her instincts whispered the truth she wasn't ready to face. She turned away before she could see more, the cookies cooling in her trembling hands. What Sarah didn't know was that someone else had seen everything. A junior employee from Davis Tech sat at another table, recognizing both David and Sarah. He quietly lifted his phone and took a photo. That night, Sarah received a message from an unknown number. "You deserve to know the truth." Attached was the photo, David and Lisa, unmistakably intimate. Sarah stared at the image, her world quietly cracking apart. The invitation came 3 days later, delivered not by text but by David's mother, Patricia Davis, during an unexpected visit to Sarah and David's apartment. Patricia stood in the doorway, her designer handbag hanging from her arm, her smile tight and practiced. "Sarah, dear, we're having a family dinner this Saturday. David's father wants everyone together. You'll come, won't you?" Sarah wiped her hands on a kitchen towel, surprised by the visit. Patricia rarely came to their temporary home, usually making subtle comments about the neighborhood or the modest furnishings. "Of course," Sarah said softly. "I'd be happy to." Patricia's eyes traveled briefly over Sarah's casual dress, lingering just a moment too long on her midsection. "Wonderful. And Sarah, perhaps wear something flattering? You know how important these family gatherings are." The words stung, but Sarah simply nodded. She'd learned years ago that defending herself against subtle jabs only invited more of them. After Patricia left, Sarah stood in her small living room, that uneasy feeling returning. Family dinners at the Davis home always felt like performances where she was perpetually cast as the inadequate outsider. She thought about declining, but David needed family support right now. His father's company was struggling. Maybe her presence, quiet as it was, would help. What Sarah didn't know was that this dinner had a purpose beyond family bonding. At the Davis family home, a grand house in the upscale Bellevue neighborhood, Richard Davis paced his study while David sat slumped in a leather chair. "The buyer is finalizing everything next week," Richard said, his voice heavy with defeat. "Some investment firm. They're keeping the identity of the actual owner completely confidential. All I know is they're taking over majority control." David's jaw tightened. "After 3 generations, we're handing it to strangers." "We have no choice," Richard snapped. "The debt is suffocating us. At least this way, the company survives." David thought about Sarah, sitting at home, completely unaware of how desperately he wished she were different. If only she had ambition. If only she understood business. If only she could actually help instead of just existing quietly in the background of his life. "Is Lisa coming to dinner?" Patricia asked, entering the study with a knowing look. David shifted uncomfortably. "She's a valuable employee, Mom. It makes sense to include her in family discussions about the company's future." Patricia smiled. "Of course, dear. She's certainly more engaged than some people." The unspoken comparison hung in the air. Saturday arrived too quickly. Sarah spent the morning preparing a dish for the dinner, a baked pasta casserole Patricia had once complimented years ago. She hoped it might soften the atmosphere, might remind them that she cared, that she was trying. She chose her outfit carefully, a simple navy dress that skimmed her curves without clinging, modest jewelry, minimal makeup. Nothing flashy. Nothing that would draw criticism. David barely spoke to her during the drive to his parents' house. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw set, his mind clearly elsewhere. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked gently. "Fine. he said curtly. Just thinking about the company. Sarah wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but the distance between them felt like a canyon she no longer knew how to cross. When they arrived, the Davis home gleamed with expensive lighting and carefully curated decor. Several cars already filled the driveway, David's brother, his wife, his uncle, and one Sarah didn't recognize. Inside, the dining room table stretched long and formal, set with china that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. Patricia greeted them at the door with air kisses that didn't quite touch Sarah's cheeks. "Sarah, you're here. The casserole can go in the kitchen. David, come say hello to everyone." David disappeared into the living room without a backward glance. Sarah carried her dish to the kitchen, where she nearly collided with a woman she didn't recognize. Late 20s, sleek dark hair, confident smile, designer dress that hugged her slim figure. "Oh, sorry," the woman said, her tone friendly but her eyes assessing. "You must be Sarah. I'm Lisa. I work with David and Richard." Something in the way Lisa said David's name, familiar, almost possessive, made Sarah's stomach tighten. "Nice to meet you," Sarah managed. Lisa's smile widened. "David talks about you sometimes. He says you're very supportive." The pause before supportive felt deliberate, like a word chosen to mean something else entirely. Sarah set down her casserole and excused herself, needing air, needing space, needing to understand why everything suddenly felt wrong. In the dining room, David stood with Lisa, laughing at something she said. His entire posture relaxed in a way Sarah hadn't seen in months. That's when Sarah realized, tonight wasn't going to be just another uncomfortable family dinner. Tonight was going to change everything. Sarah took her seat at the far end of the long dining table, as she always did. Not quite part of the main conversation, not quite excluded, just peripheral. David sat near his father at the opposite end. Lisa positioned herself just 2 seats away from David, close enough to lean over and whisper comments that made him smile. Patricia brought out course after course, each dish presented with careful pride. When she passed the bread basket to Sarah, she leaned close and whispered, "Maybe skip the carbs tonight, dear. Family dinners do tend to add pounds." Sarah's face flushed, but she simply passed the basket along without taking any. The conversation flowed around her. Business talk. Market conditions. The mysterious buyer who was taking over Davis Tech Solutions. Richard spoke with barely contained anxiety while his brother offered useless platitudes. "The acquisition finalizes next week," Richard said, his voice strained. "Everything's been handled through intermediaries. I don't even know who actually owns the investment firm." David leaned back, frustrated. 30 years of family legacy, and we're handing it to some faceless corporation. "We had no choice," Richard repeated. "The debt was crushing us." Sarah listened quietly, her mind working. She understood corporate acquisitions better than anyone at this table realized. She'd facilitated dozens through her mother's holdings. The structure Richard described, anonymous ownership through holding companies, was exactly how her own portfolio operated. A strange thought flickered through her mind, but she pushed it away. Seattle had hundreds of tech companies. The coincidence would be astronomical. "Sarah, you're awfully quiet," Patricia said, her tone pointed. "Though I suppose business discussions are over your head." Several people chuckled softly. Sarah felt the familiar sting but said nothing. David didn't defend her. He barely glanced her direction. Lisa, however, smiled, a small, satisfied expression that made Sarah's chest tighten. The meal continued. Sarah picked at her food, her appetite gone. She'd brought the casserole hoping to contribute something, but it sat barely touched while Patricia's dishes received enthusiastic praise. Then David's phone buzzed. He checked it quickly, his expression shifting, annoyance mixed with something else. Guilt, maybe. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "I need to take this. Work call." He disappeared into the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, voice dropping to a whisper. Lisa watched him go, then caught Sarah's eye. Her smile widened slightly, almost challenging. Sarah's hands trembled in her lap. That photo from the unknown number flashed through her mind. The coffee shop. The intimate body language. Lisa's hand on David's arm. Patricia cleared her throat. Sarah, dear, did you make this casserole yourself? Yes, Sarah said softly. How sweet. Though it is quite heavy, isn't it? All that cheese and pasta. Her eyes dropped meaningfully to Sarah's midsection. Some of us have to watch our figures more carefully than others. The table went quiet. A few uncomfortable glances were exchanged, but no one spoke up. Sarah felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, not yet, but fracture. A thin line spreading through whatever hope she'd been holding on to. David returned, sliding back into his seat. He didn't apologize for the interruption. He didn't check if Sarah was okay. Richard stood, raising his glass. Despite everything, we're still family. And family stands together through difficult times. Everyone raised their glasses. Sarah lifted hers mechanically. That's when David's frustration boiled over. You know what? He said, his voice sharp and loud. I'm tired of pretending everything's fine. The room froze. This company is failing because Dad refuses to adapt. Because everyone's too sentimental about the past to make hard decisions. He gestured broadly, his face flushed. And I'm stuck dealing with all of it while. His eyes landed on Sarah. While some people just sit there contributing absolutely nothing. Sarah's breath stopped. David's voice rose, fueled by stress and alcohol and months of built-up resentment. You want to know the truth? I'm exhausted. Exhausted by pressure, by responsibility, by having a wife who doesn't understand anything about what I'm going through. Patricia made a weak gesture. David, maybe. But he wasn't finished. He looked directly at Sarah, his expression cruel in a way she'd never seen before. You're just a poor fat pig, he said clearly, deliberately. You should be grateful anyone married you. The words exploded through the room like a bomb. Every fork stopped mid-air. Every conversation died. Every eye turned toward Sarah. No one spoke. No one defended her. Patricia looked away. Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. David's brother stared at his plate. Lisa smiled. Sarah sat frozen, the words echoing in her ears. The room blurred. Her hands shook. And something inside her, that last fragile thread of hope, finally snapped. Sarah stood slowly, her chair pushing back with a soft scrape that somehow cut through the heavy silence. Every eye in the room followed her movement. Her face was calm. Too calm. Not angry, not tearful, just eerily still. The kind of stillness that comes after something fundamental breaks inside a person. Thank you, she said softly, her voice steady in a way that unsettled everyone. Thank you for showing me exactly who you all are. Patricia opened her mouth, perhaps to smooth things over with some meaningless platitude, but Sarah's quiet dignity stopped her. Sarah looked around the table one last time. At Richard, who'd never once asked about her own work or interests. At Patricia, who'd spent years making subtle comments about her body. At David's brother, who'd watched the cruelty without speaking up. At Lisa, who was still smiling. At David, whose face now showed the first flicker of uncertainty, as if some part of him recognized he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Excuse me, Sarah said with devastating politeness. I need some air. She walked toward the door, her movements measured and graceful. She didn't run. She didn't slam anything. She simply left with a quiet dignity that somehow made her departure more powerful than any outburst could have been. The heavy front door closed with a soft click. Inside, uncomfortable silence stretched for several long seconds. Well, Patricia finally said, her voice artificially bright. Shall we have dessert? But the evening was ruined. Everyone knew it. David stared at his plate, his expression shifting between defiance and something that might have been regret. Lisa touched his arm, but he pulled away slightly, distracted. What none of them knew was that outside, standing on the pristine walkway under the evening sky, Sarah was making a phone call that would destroy everything David held dear. "Margaret," Sarah said, her voice quiet but clear. "Move the acquisition date up. I want to meet with the Davis Tech Solutions Board tomorrow morning." Margaret Wells' voice came through carefully. "Sarah, that's very short notice. Are you certain?" "Completely certain. And Margaret, I'm going in person. I want them to know exactly who bought their company." There was a pause. "Does this have something to do with your husband?" Sarah closed her eyes. "Not my husband anymore. File the divorce papers first thing tomorrow. Grounds: emotional abuse, public humiliation, infidelity. Everything documented." "Consider it done," Margaret said quietly. "I'll have the legal team ready. Sarah, your mother would be proud." Sarah ended the call and stood in the cool Seattle air, her hand pressed against her chest. She wasn't crying. She was breathing. Actually breathing for the first time in months. A car pulled up, the driver Margaret had sent, anticipating Sarah might need an exit. Sarah slid into the back seat. "Take me home, please. I have documents to review." As the car pulled away from the Davis family home, Sarah allowed herself one glance back. Through the dining room window, she could see them all still sitting there, continuing their evening as if nothing had happened. They had no idea the woman they just humiliated owned their entire future. Back inside, David finally stood, running a hand through his hair. I should probably go talk to her. Give her time to cool off," Patricia suggested. "She's just being oversensitive." But David felt uneasy. Something in Sarah's eyes before she left, that calm, clear look, didn't seem like someone who needed to cool off. It seemed like someone who'd made a decision. His phone buzzed. A text from Lisa. "You okay?" He typed back quickly. "Yeah, fine." But he wasn't fine. For the first time in months, he felt genuinely unsettled. Across town, Sarah sat at her desk, her laptop open, documents spread around her. Margaret had sent everything: the acquisition papers, the board meeting agenda, the evidence files on David's affair, the divorce petition. Sarah read through each document with careful attention. Not with anger, but with the precise focus her mother had taught her. Emotion had its place, but decisions this important required clarity. She opened a drawer and pulled out the framed photo of her mother. 9-year-old Sarah stood beside Linda in that boardroom, watching her sign papers that moved millions. "Power isn't about showing off," Linda had said. "It's about protecting what matters." Sarah understood now. She'd spent years trying to protect her marriage, trying to make herself smaller and quieter to avoid conflict, to avoid being used for her wealth. But David hadn't protected her. He'd humiliated her. And now, protection meant something different. It meant protecting herself. Sarah closed the drawer and returned to her documents. By morning, David's entire world would change. He just didn't know it yet. The Davis Tech Solutions boardroom buzzed with nervous energy. Richard sat at the head of the table, papers scattered in front of him, his face gray with stress. David paced near the windows, tie loosened, phone in hand. "They said the owner's representative would be here at 9, Richard muttered, checking his watch for the third time in 2 minutes. "Representative," David scoffed. "They won't even show themselves. Just some corporate puppet who'll tell us how to run our own company." Several board members shifted uncomfortably. The truth was, they needed this acquisition. The company was drowning in debt, losing clients, hemorrhaging money. The mysterious buyer was their only lifeline. Lisa sat near David, positioned where she could catch his eye easily. She wore a sharp suit that projected competence, her presence suggesting she belonged in these high-level discussions. Patricia occupied a seat as well, officially as Richard's spouse and company co-founder, though everyone knew her role was more social than strategic. "Whoever this person is," Richard said quietly, "we need to make a good impression. Our jobs depend on it. David stopped pacing. I still can't believe we're at some stranger's mercy. The door clicked. Everyone stood instinctively, expecting a corporate lawyer or business executive in an expensive suit. The door opened. Sarah stepped inside. The room froze as if time itself had stuttered. Sarah wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that fit her curves professionally and confidently. Her hair was styled simply but elegantly. She carried a leather briefcase in one hand and a folder in the other. But more than her appearance, it was her presence, calm, assured, completely in control, that stopped everyone's breath. What are you doing here? David stammered, his face shifting from confusion to something like panic. Sarah walked steadily to the center of the room. She didn't look at David. She addressed the entire board. Good morning. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and as of yesterday afternoon, I am the majority owner of Davis Tech Solutions. The words hung in the air like smoke. That's impossible, David said, his voice cracking. You can't. Sarah set her briefcase down and opened the folder. I purchased this company through my holding corporation. The acquisition was finalized legally and properly. The bank has been notified. All documentation is here. She slid papers across the table. Richard grabbed them with shaking hands, his eyes scanning the text. His face went white. This is real, he whispered. Patricia stood abruptly. How could you possibly afford this? You're just a poor fat pig. Sarah finished quietly, her eyes finally meeting David's. I believe that's how your son described me last night. The room went deadly silent. Margaret Wells appeared in the doorway, her presence adding legal weight to everything Sarah said. Gentlemen, ladies, I'm Ms. Wells, Ms. Mitchell's corporate attorney. Everything is in order. Ms. Mitchell inherited her mother's investment empire upon her death. She has been operating under her birth name in all business matters for over a decade. David collapsed into a chair, his face a mask of disbelief. Your mother? You never said. You never asked, Sarah replied simply. In 13 years of marriage, you never once asked about my family's background, my education, or my work. You assumed I was simple because I chose to live simply. Lisa's confident expression crumbled. She slowly slid her chair away from David, putting physical distance between them. Sarah continued, her voice calm and professional. As the new owner, I'm making immediate leadership changes. Effective today, David Davis and Richard Davis are removed from their executive positions. You can't, David started. I can, Sarah interrupted, still calm. With majority ownership, I have full authority to restructure management. Your termination packages will be standard, but both of you are being let go due to mismanagement, poor financial decisions, and, she looked directly at David, documented evidence of using company resources for personal affairs. She pulled out another folder, this one containing printed photos. David and Lisa at the coffee shop. Restaurant receipts charged to company accounts. Hotel bookings. Text message records. An internal audit revealed consistent misuse of company funds, Sarah said. Ms. Warren, your employment is also terminated effective immediately. Lisa's face went pale. She started to protest, but Margaret stepped forward. If you have concerns, you may contact our legal department. But I assure you, everything is documented and actionable. Richard found his voice finally, shaking with rage and desperation. You can't destroy what we've built over 3 generations. Sarah's expression softened slightly, not with sympathy, but with genuine sadness. I'm not destroying anything, Richard. I'm saving it. Your son destroyed your family's legacy through arrogance and poor choices. I'm simply preventing further damage. She turned to leave, then paused. The company will survive under new leadership. But the 3 of you will not be part of that future. David burst out of the Davis Tech building like a man escaping a fire, his briefcase dangling from one hand, his shirt untucked, his face red and panicked. Sarah. Sarah. But Sarah was already at the curb, sliding into the back seat of a black car. Margaret stood beside the vehicle, speaking quietly with the driver. David ran down the steps, nearly tripping over his own feet. Sarah, wait. Please. The car door closed. David reached the sidewalk just as the car pulled smoothly into traffic. He stood there, chest heaving, watching his wife, his soon-to-be ex-wife, disappear down the street without a single glance back. Behind him, building security stood at the entrance. When he tried to go back inside, one guard stepped forward. "I'm sorry, Mr. Davis. Your access has been revoked." "What? This is my father's company." "Not anymore, sir." The guard's voice was professional but firm. "New owner's directive. Your personal belongings will be mailed to you." The reality crashed over David like ice water. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. He dialed Sarah's number. It rang once before going to voicemail, not her voice, but an automated message. He tried again. Same result. On the third attempt, a different voice answered. "Mr. Davis, this is Margaret Wells, Ms. Mitchell's attorney. I'll be handling all communication going forward." Put Sarah on the phone. "I'm afraid that won't be possible. You are being officially served, Mr. Davis. Check your email." The call ended. David stared at his phone in disbelief. An email notification appeared. He opened it with trembling fingers. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." The words blurred. He scrolled down, his stomach twisting as he read the grounds: emotional abuse, public humiliation, infidelity, misuse of marital trust. Everything was documented. Dates, locations, evidence. A man approached from a parked car and handed David a large manila envelope. "David Davis, you've been served." David tore it open. Inside were copies of everything: divorce papers, termination notice, the evidence file Margaret had shown in the boardroom. His entire life, his marriage, his job, his future, all ending in a stack of legal documents. Hours later, David found himself standing outside Lisa's apartment building, desperate for someone, anyone, who might understand, who might offer comfort. He knocked on her door. Once. Twice. Finally, it opened a crack. Lisa stood there, already changed out of her work clothes, a glass of wine in hand. Her expression when she saw him was something between annoyance and disbelief. "Oh, it's you. Lisa, please. Can we talk?" David's voice cracked. "Everything just fell apart and I—" "You mean your everything fell apart?" Lisa interrupted coldly. "I just lost my job because of your mess." "Our mess," David said desperately. "We were in this together." Lisa laughed. A harsh, brittle sound. "Together." "David, I was interested in you when you were the heir to a tech company. When you had connections. When you had a future." She looked him up and down with open disdain. "What are you now? An unemployed guy with no prospects, no money, and a divorce on your hands. Why exactly would I waste my time?" David felt like he'd been slapped. "But you said you cared about me." "I said a lot of things," Lisa replied with a shrug. "It was fun while it lasted. While you were useful. But I'm not going down with your sinking ship." She started to close the door. "Lisa, please. Go home, David. Or wherever home is now. Just don't come back here." The door slammed shut. David stood in the hallway, alone, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. The apartment he'd sometimes used as a hideout, paid for with company funds that were now documented in Sarah's evidence file, suddenly felt like a cage. He stumbled back to his car and drove aimlessly, eventually ending up at his parents' house in Bellevue. When he walked through the door, he found his family in the living room. His father sat slumped on the couch, still wearing his suit from the meeting. His mother stood by the window, arms crossed. His brother leaned against the wall, shaking his head slowly. Dad, David began. Richard's head snapped up, his face red with fury. Don't say a single word. We can fix this. We can fix this. Richard's voice rose to a shout. You destroyed everything. 30 years of work, 3 generations of legacy, and you threw it away because you couldn't keep your mouth shut or your pants zipped. Patricia turned from the window, her perfectly composed facade cracking. That woman, that quiet, sweet woman I dismissed, she owned billions, David. And you called her a pig. In front of everyone. I was stressed. The company was failing because of poor management, his brother cut in. Not because of Sarah. She had nothing to do with our problems. But she could have been the solution, and you made her the enemy. David sank into a chair, his head in his hands. How was I supposed to know? You were supposed to care enough to know, Patricia said, her voice breaking. You were supposed to love your wife enough to actually see her, to ask about her life, to treat her with basic respect. Richard stood, his voice dropping to a devastating whisper. The company will survive. Under new ownership, with new leadership, it will probably thrive. But you lost everything, son. And you have no one to blame but yourself. The silence that followed felt like a funeral. David looked around at his family, all of them looking at him with disappointment, anger, and something worse, pity. He had no company, no wife, no future, and absolutely no one to blame but himself. 3 weeks had passed since the boardroom confrontation. 3 weeks since divorce papers were filed. 3 weeks since David's world collapsed. For Sarah, these same 3 weeks marked a transformation. She stood now in the executive office of Davis Tech Solutions, her office, reviewing reports from department heads. The nameplate on her desk read, Sarah Mitchell, CEO. Not Davis. Mitchell. Her name. Her identity. Her power. Margaret sat across from her, a tablet in hand. The staff morale has improved significantly. Productivity is up 18% since you implemented the new management structure. Sarah nodded, making notes on the document in front of her. What about the client retention rate? Better than projected. Several clients who are considering leaving have renewed their contracts. They appreciate the stability and transparency. Sarah had spent these weeks learning every aspect of the company. She'd met with every department, listened to employees who'd been ignored for years, identified inefficiencies that Richard and David had been too proud to address. She'd discovered talented developers who'd been overlooked, marketing strategies that had never been implemented, client relationships that had been damaged by poor communication. And she'd fixed them, not by coming in with arrogance or demands, but by asking questions, listening carefully, and making thoughtful decisions. The same quiet competence that people had mistaken for simplicity turned out to be exactly what the company needed. Ms. Mitchell, her new assistant James, knocked gently on the door. The new leadership team is ready for the strategy meeting. Sarah stood, smoothing her suit jacket. She'd built an entirely new executive team, people promoted from within who actually understood the company's culture and potential. As she walked through the office toward the conference room, employees greeted her respectfully. No one whispered about her body or her clothes now. They saw her competence, her fairness, her vision. In the conference room, 6 department heads stood as she entered. Real respect, not performative politeness. Please sit, Sarah said, taking her place at the head of the table. Let's talk about where we're going. For the next hour, they discussed expansion strategies, new technologies, employee development programs. Sarah listened more than she spoke, asking questions that showed she understood the technical details everyone assumed she wouldn't grasp. When the meeting ended, her chief technology officer, a woman named Jennifer who'd been stuck in a junior role under the previous management, lingered behind. Ms. Mitchell, I just wanted to say thank you. I've been here 7 years, and this is the first time I've felt like my ideas actually mattered. Sarah smiled gently. They always mattered, Jennifer. Someone just needed to listen. After everyone left, Sarah stood at the window of her office, looking out over Seattle's skyline. The city stretched before her, full of possibilities that had always existed but that she'd kept hidden to protect herself. Her phone buzzed. A message from Margaret. Divorce proceedings are moving smoothly. David's attorney attempted to claim rights to marital assets, but our documentation is airtight. Everything you owned was yours before the marriage and kept completely separate. Sarah read the message without emotion. Not satisfaction. Not anger. Just acknowledgement. Another message came through, this one from an unknown number. I hope you're doing okay. You deserved better. A friend. Sarah suspected it was the employee who'd sent her that first photo, the one that had opened her eyes to David's affair. She typed back simply, "Thank you. I'm exactly where I need to be." That evening, Sarah returned to her apartment, the same modest place she'd lived in throughout her marriage. She'd considered moving, but decided against it. This space represented her choice to live authentically, without pretense. She made herself tea and sat on her small couch, pulling out the wooden box that held her mother's letter. She unfolded the worn paper and read the familiar words. Use your inheritance when your heart is no longer safe. Sarah traced her mother's handwriting with her finger. I did, Mom. And I'm okay. She thought about the journey, how she'd spent years making herself small, hiding her power, choosing peace over confrontation. How she'd believed that love meant accepting disrespect, that kindness meant never defending herself. She knew now that real strength didn't mean being loud or aggressive. It meant knowing your worth and refusing to accept less than you deserved. Her phone rang. Margaret's name appeared on the screen. Sarah, I have news. David's attorney called. He wants to negotiate. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. There's nothing to negotiate. The divorce terms are fair and final. He gets nothing from my assets because they were never shared. He keeps whatever he earned during the marriage. That's it. He's asking if you'd be willing to help him financially. He's struggling to find work. Sarah's response was immediate and calm. No. Understood. I'll communicate that. After hanging up, Sarah sat in the quiet of her apartment. She felt no guilt about her decision. David had choices every day. Choices to respect her, to value her, to see her. He'd made different choices. Now he would live with the consequences. And Sarah was finally free. 6 weeks after the boardroom meeting, Sarah received an unexpected call. Ms. Mitchell, there's a David Davis in the lobby, James said carefully. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's asking to speak with you. Security is standing by if you want him removed. Sarah looked up from her computer, her expression unreadable. She'd known this moment would come eventually. David was desperate, and desperate people always tried one last time. Give me 5 minutes, then send him up, she said calmly. But have security wait just outside the office. She used those 5 minutes to center herself, to remember who she was now. Not the woman who'd been humiliated at a dinner table. Not the wife who'd absorbed every cruel comment in silence. The CEO who'd increased company profits by 23% in 6 weeks. The leader who'd restored client confidence and employee morale. The woman who'd finally stepped fully into her power. The knock came softly. Come in, Sarah said. The door opened, and David stepped inside. He looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled and hung loosely on his frame, like he'd lost weight. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His hair, usually perfectly styled, looked like he'd combed it with his fingers. But more than his appearance, it was his posture that showed his defeat. Shoulders slumped, head down, moving with the careful uncertainty of someone who no longer knew their place in the world. Sarah, he said, his voice rough. Thank you for seeing me. She didn't invite him to sit. She simply waited. David shifted uncomfortably. I've been trying to find work. But everywhere I go, they've heard about what happened. About what I said. About everything. Sarah remained silent. I know I don't deserve your help, David continued, the words tumbling out desperately. I know I destroyed everything. But Sarah, we were married for 13 years. That has to count for something. It counted, Sarah said quietly. It counted right up until you called me a poor fat pig in front of your entire family. David flinched like he'd been struck. I was drunk and stressed and cruel, Sarah finished. You were cruel, David. Not just that night, but for months before. Every dismissive comment. Every time you made me feel stupid for not understanding your problems. Every moment you spent with Lisa while I waited at home hoping you'd remember you had a wife. I'm sorry, David said, tears forming in his eyes. God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. I was an idiot. I didn't see what I had. I didn't appreciate you. No, you didn't, Sarah agreed calmly. You spent 13 years with me and never once asked about my family, my education, my work, or my dreams. You assumed I was simple because I dressed simply. You assumed I was weak because I chose kindness. You assumed I had nothing to offer because I didn't perform for your family. David wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I know all of that now. And if I could go back. But you can't, Sarah interrupted gently. You can't go back. And I wouldn't want you to. She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. You know what I learned, David? I learned that I spent years making myself smaller so you would feel bigger. I hid my success so you wouldn't feel inadequate. I accepted disrespect so you wouldn't feel challenged. She turned to face him. I was so afraid of being used for my money that I let myself be used in a different way. I let you and your family treat me like I was less than. Like I should be grateful for scraps of affection. Sarah. I'm not finished, she said, her voice still calm but firm. You came here hoping I would help you. Maybe give you money, or a job, or a second chance. But David, helping you would be doing the same thing I always did. Protecting you from the consequences of your own choices. She walked back to her desk and sat down, her posture straight and confident. I can't do that anymore. You need to learn what I learned. That respect isn't given, it's earned. That kindness isn't weakness. That the quiet ones you dismiss might be the ones holding more power than you ever imagined. David's face crumbled. So that's it. After 13 years, you're just going to let me struggle. I'm going to let you grow, Sarah corrected. The same way I had to grow. The same way I had to learn to value myself when no one else would. She pressed a button on her phone. James, Mr. Davis is ready to leave. David stood frozen, perhaps hoping she would change her mind, perhaps searching for words that might make a difference. Sarah met his eyes one final time. I genuinely hope you become a better person, David. I hope you learn to see people for who they really are. But you'll do that without me. Security appeared at the door. David walked toward it slowly, then paused. I really did love you, you know. In my own way. Sarah's expression softened slightly. Not with hope, but with sadness. I know. But your own way wasn't good enough. And I deserve better. As David left, Sarah returned to her work. She had a company to run, a future to build, and a life to live on her own terms. 1 year later, Sarah stood on the rooftop terrace of Davis Tech Solutions, now officially renamed Mitchell Technologies. The company logo, sleek and modern, gleamed on the building across the street. The Seattle skyline stretched around her, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. She'd done it. Not just saved the company, but transformed it completely. Under her leadership, Mitchell Technologies had expanded into 3 new markets, acquired 2 smaller companies, and doubled its revenue. Forbes had featured her in an article titled, The Quiet Revolutionary, How Sarah Mitchell Changed Tech Leadership. But more than the numbers, Sarah was proud of the culture she'd built. Fair wages. Flexible work arrangements. mental health support, leadership training that prioritized emotional intelligence alongside technical skills. She'd created the kind of company her mother would have been proud of. Ms. Mitchell. Jennifer, her CTO, stepped onto the terrace. The photographer is here for the Women in Tech magazine shoot. Sarah smiled. I'll be right there. As Jennifer left, Sarah took one last moment alone, breathing in the crisp Seattle air. She thought about the journey, from the quiet, underestimated wife to the CEO who transformed an entire company. She thought about David too, though less frequently now. She'd heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd eventually found work at a small startup, a junior position with none of the prestige he'd once taken for granted. He'd moved to a different part of the city, was apparently seeing a therapist, trying to rebuild his life piece by piece. Sarah felt no satisfaction in his struggles, but no guilt either. He was responsible for his own path, just as she was responsible for hers. Her phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. Divorce finalized this morning. You're officially free. Sarah read the message and felt peaceful. Not celebratory, not sad, just at peace. Another message came through, this one from a dating app she'd cautiously joined a few months ago. A nice message from someone who'd actually read her profile, who'd asked thoughtful questions about her work. Sarah smiled. Maybe someday she'd be ready. Maybe not. Either way, she was complete on her own. The photo shoot went well. The photographer, a woman in her 40s, positioned Sarah in her office, at her desk, by the windows overlooking the city. Can you tell me the story behind the company name change? The photographer asked between shots. Sarah considered the question. Mitchell was my mother's name. She taught me that power doesn't need to be loud to be real. That kindness isn't weakness. That you can change the world without losing yourself. And your ex-husband? His family's name used to be on the building. Sarah's expression remained calm. They built something good, but they lost sight of what mattered. I'm honored to carry it forward in a way that respects both the legacy and the people who make it possible. That evening, Sarah returned to her apartment, the same modest place she'd kept throughout everything. She'd looked at luxury condos, penthouses with views and amenities, but something about this space felt right. It represented her choice to live authentically, to value substance over appearance. She made herself dinner, something simple and comforting, and settled on her couch with her mother's wooden box. Inside was the letter, now carefully preserved, along with new additions. The Forbes article, a photo of her leadership team, a handwritten note from an employee thanking her for creating a workplace where people felt valued. Sarah added one more item to the box. The final divorce decree. Not because she was dwelling on the past, but because it represented closure. The official end of a chapter that had taught her everything she needed to know about her own worth. As she closed the box, her phone rang. An unknown number. She answered cautiously. Hello, Ms. Mitchell? This is Rebecca Chen from the Governor's Council on Women's Economic Empowerment. We'd like to invite you to speak at our annual conference about your journey and leadership philosophy. Sarah felt a flutter of nerves, then remembered who she was now. I'd be honored. After the call ended, Sarah walked to her window and looked out at the city lights beginning to twinkle across Seattle. She thought about the quiet girl who'd hidden her power to protect herself. The wife who'd made herself small to avoid conflict. The woman who'd been called a poor fat pig by someone who never knew her at all. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger. Not because she'd learned to be loud or aggressive, but because she'd learned that real power comes from knowing your worth and refusing to accept less. Sarah's journey hadn't been about revenge. It had been about reclamation. Reclaiming her identity, her voice, her space in the world. She'd spent years being underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked. And she'd used every moment of that invisibility to build something real, something lasting, something true. The quiet ones, Sarah had learned, aren't weak. They're just waiting for the right moment to show the world what they've always known about themselves. And when that moment comes, everything changes. Sarah smiled at her reflection in the window, A woman comfortable in her own skin, powerful in her own way, free in every sense that mattered. She'd risen. Not from nothing, but from hiding. And she would never hide again. What an incredible journey. From humiliation to triumph, Sarah showed us what real strength looks like. If this story inspired you, hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling me, what was your favorite moment in Sarah's story? And what lesson will you take from her journey? Thank you for watching until the end. Remember, never let anyone make you feel small. Your worth isn't determined by how others see you. It's determined by how you see yourself. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story. Until next time, stand tall and know your worth. Flexed biceps sparkles ****.